Good morning.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm well, thank you, Chuck. How about yourself?
Well, it's Wednesday. We're making it.
Yes, we are.
We're gonna get through
Hello.
somehow. Give everybody a minute to get here. We still got like 2 more minutes.
Sound a bit large.
Hey, John, how you doing?
Charles, good morning. Doing fine, thank you. Supposedly, they're wrapping up my quote-unquote renovation today.
Okay, all right. Your
Oh.
sound,
Pardon?
your sound is going out.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah, something about it.
Oh, I bet maybe I got the radio on in the back. Let me turn that off.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Yeah, it's like all of a sudden your voice kind of faded out.
I'm using more from on. I'm muted.
Hey, Billy.
Hey, how's it going, Charles?
It's Wednesday, man. We made it.
Halfway through, anyway.
Well, yeah, we get over to lunchtime, man. We'll be on the downhill side of this week. So, everybody doing okay over there?
Yeah, everybody's doing well here.
Good.
How's my voice now? Is it okay, or is it still?
Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. You know, I can hear you a lot better than I could there for a little bit.
Okay, all right, that's good.
Yeah, I'll turn my volume way up just in case. So,
I don't have much to say anyway.
really,
Really?
that's that's so unlike you.
Yes, right. My new image.
Your new image? Okay.
Right.
All right. Well, guess what we're going to talk about today? Since this is about, this is painting techniques and stuff like that, we're going to be talking about painting. As I declined his phone call. Sorry about that. Gee, how rude, calling me right in the middle of class there, or the beginning of class. At any rate, we're going to be talking about painting, and we're going to be talking about a particular type of painting that we don't normally talk about. And actually, Lady had brought it up the other day. It's like, not everything has to be representational, and that's true, okay? In fact, there's this whole world out there called abstract art that, it was a pretty big deal for a while, and still is, in some ways. But painting and art in general, whether it's sculpture, painting, or anything else, they've sort of diverged in 2 different directions. You have those people who are doing what we call representational art, and then you have those people that we call, abstract artists. And still today, if you go to some academic, like universities, things like that, what you're going to be sort of, awash in is a group of painters and academic people who are really into this whole abstract thing, right? And creating abstract art and trying to do something, radically different than has ever been done before, right? And then, more and more, if you go to different schools, some other universities, you might find that they have an academic program that really stresses, visual arts as a representational approach. And it will all sort of depend on who they have, as professors and their education and their experience and where they basically came from, right? So just, understand that, right now in the world as it exists today, those two very different art forms coexist. And in many ways, they coexist very comfortably. And as we've gotten into now the 21st century, I think the reality is that, more and more representational painters, have got to realize that what you're doing anytime you pick up a paintbrush or a pencil or a pen is, you're abstracting what it is, that you're trying to represent anyway. You're simplifying it, because that's really all that abstraction is to reduce it, to simplify it to the simplest possible terms. Now that might be color, it might be line, it might be value, it might be shape. You can use any of those elements of art to, describe the thing that you're talking about, even if the thing you're talking about doesn't really have a shape or a form, or isn't really visual, but like an emotion, right? So we're going to look at a whole bunch of abstract art today, and we're going to watch a couple of videos on what abstract art is, and we might even get into what the rules of it are, at least the first part of that. Okay, so I'm going to start, and hopefully you guys have your cup of coffee, and we'll get going here. Okay.
Abstract.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start off with, where is? This is the one I want. Yes. All right. Yes. What is abstract art? Okay. Now, unfortunately, we're in the middle of a commercial here, so we're going to let him play through.
Galleries anymore. You can go directly to your customers.
Abstract art is the dominant art form of the 20th century. Despite generally being accepted as culturally important, it's often seen as something of an elaborate joke, or worse, a case of the emperor's nose. This is because abstract art is not supposed to really look like anything, which can make it kind of hard to understand. Instead of looking like stuff, it's more often comprised of forms and colours that are there for their own expressive sake. They can be minimal or contain many elements and arrangements of form that don't really look like anything most sober people will ever see. This is when issues begin when trying to understand just what these paintings are, or why someone made them, and especially why anyone would declare them to be genius works of art. I mean, what is this even supposed to be? And look at these prices. Is this all some elaborate money laundering scheme? Well, some of it might be. But to really understand abstract art, we need to understand a little bit about its history and its goals first. Abstraction rose to prominence in the 20th century as a result of factors both cultural and political. As with everything else involved in the 20th century, it gets very complicated very quickly. Abstraction didn't come out of nowhere, though. It had always been around the periphery of art if you look back into history. Joshua Reynolds, the patron saint of the English Royal Academy, once wrote about the beauty of form alone, which made paintings great without the need for assistance from other qualities. This expresses the aesthetic premise behind abstract art, that formal qualities are more important than the subject matter they are used to depict. For example, it's not the tree that you paint that's important, it's the colors you use, where you place it on the canvas, how it relates to the other elements in the picture, etc. That's what really makes a good picture, and that's what we enjoy about the painting, not just the simple fact that we recognize it as being a tree. Once people realize this, it becomes quite liberating. If it's just the pleasing arrangement of colors and such that we need for our aesthetic hit, why not get rid of the tree altogether? Well, a lot of groups around the beginning of the 20th century were thinking like this, and they all wanted to chop down that tree in their own way. Movements like Fauvism or Cubism appeared that looked analytically at the world and rearranged the formal elements they found create new works that referenced their subjects and reconstructed them in new, formally elegant ways. In Italy, the Futurist movement celebrated technology and industrialization in its works, which broke from academic tradition and headed into abstraction as a new way to depict the new world. Meanwhile, the Surrealists were taking painting further away from a need to depict reality, and the Dada movement was doing, well, whatever it felt like, really, mostly acting irrationally. Finally, in Russia, a group of artists were extreme enough to push the boat out and go full ab, having been inspired by the works of the other movements. Kazimir Malevich would exhibit geometric works like the Black Square, which would set the tone for painting to come in the 20th century. All of these movements were pushing art forwards towards abstraction. Other factors, such as 2 world wars, industrialization, the rise of communism, fascism, and capitalism, and the increasing secularity of the Western world, all played a role too. All this rapid change was making traditional art look under to represent the modern world, stuck as it was in the trappings of traditions that stretched back into previous, less volatile centuries.
Uh-oh.
Absolutely, that's the
We're gonna
bottom
be
line.
accosted
At
by
this
another
moment
ad.
in time,
There we go.
Abstraction, in contrast, responded to new questions of culture that the 20th century brought, and do so in a much more effective way than traditional institutional art could, using only colour and shapes to make us feel something. It didn't need to rely on traditional trappings of art, such as medieval angels or whatever this thing is, to evoke a response in the viewer, at least in theory. Figures such as Wassily Kandinsky would further develop the theory of abstraction during this period. Kandinsky is often credited as the first person to paint abstractly, and while it's very hard to confirm this, he did lay out some core tenets of what will eventually become abstract art. Kandinsky thought that art was seeking to represent a sort of internal necessity of its subjects, the bare minimum needed to convey their essence, or what they were. He realized that to do this, an accurate depiction of a subject's form was not really necessary. Instead, what was needed was an understanding of what it evoked in us and how we could represent that visually as what he termed an external necessity. Think of it as being a kind of visual Platonism, if that helps, where everything has an essential essence that allows us to understand them. Kandinsky's influence for thinking like this came from his own practice as an artist, as well as his interest in music and law, which predisposed him to placing his visual ideas into a codified system of notation and rules. He was also influenced by the ideas of contemporary philosophers and New Age movements like Theosophy. Theosophy itself is quite interesting for its huge impact on art and culture, which is really weird, but one thing at a time. For Kandinsky, pure form had a spiritual purpose to it. A round spot could be more significant than the human figure, or a triangle placed over a circle could be as significant as God touching the finger of Adam in Michelangelo. How much this had to do with Kandinsky's philosophical and spiritual inclinations, and how much of it was a result of his condition as a synesthesist, is uncertain. This possible condition makes reading Kandinsky's work quite entertaining, as he earnestly tries to explain to you how a blue circle sounds or a yellow triangle feels. So, now that we have some idea of the why of abstraction, how do we go about reading these artworks? How can we understand what they are trying to say to us and where they come from? Most importantly, how do we make sense of it all? Abstract art can be made about practically anything. It can be based on something the artist has observed, or an idea they had, or even on nothing at all. Abstract art may also stem from an artist's observations of something in the world, but that doesn't mean it has to look like that subject. Kandinsky himself outlined a few basic sources of inspiration for abstract art. First, an impression of nature. The world around us can provide an idea or an emotion which triggers an artwork that may not be exactly representative of what we saw, but still seeks to convey something of its essence to us. Secondly, it may be an unconscious expression of internal, non-material ideas. An artwork based on nothing at all, or what Kandinsky terms an improvisation, creating freely and without the restraint of any physical subject matter. Finally, it may be a slowly formed expression of inner feelings that have been considered and given form in a composition. This is probably what most people are thinking about when they think of abstract art. Much like the other two methods, it can depict a feeling or an idea without much correspondence to the physical world, but is much more reliant on composition and arrangements of formal elements. These are not the only ways to create abstract work. There are as many ways to paint as there are painters to paint them. It does give us a little bit of an idea of what abstract artists are thinking about when they create their work. So now that we understand some of these basic possibilities for the creation of abstraction, what are some ways we can read or understand what the artist is intending, or which mode of working they are engaged in? Three more aspects that can characterize abstract art.
You see, the world has changed. You don't
Yes,
need
we
to
know that.
sell at events and galleries anymore. You can go directly to your
Art, reduction and simplification, the paring back of what is needed to communicate an idea. Sure, we can overload the eye with information or create very realistic works. We can also go the other way and attempt to reduce to barest essential forms, just as Kandinsky thought about the external necessity of depicting a subject. This might sound like a way of doing less work, but removing all but the necessary is actually a very difficult thing to do. The sculptor Brancusi is an example of this working method. He was able to pare back the unnecessary elements in his subjects and leave only those he needed, which results in fluid sculptures that express their subjects in bizarrely elegant ways. This one here, for example, is a bird. I don't know about you, but I think that conveys the essence of birdness pretty well. Construction. Arranging basic forms to create a composition that is not based on any real reality, i.e., it is non-representational. Paul Klee or Kandinsky himself are good examples of this. These paintings can either be sensually appealing or unbearably cerebral, as they rely on pure composition and formal elegance to achieve their goals. Your mileage may vary by how much of an art snob you are, but this kind of art provides some of the purest expressions of what we find beautiful and explores why we feel that way. 3 acts of spontaneity. This requires the artist to react naturally to the composition and embrace chance and randomness. Often, this will incorporate the chosen media and embrace its natural tendencies to splash or drip, for example. They can tend to look messy and be very hard on the eye, but it also provides another way to paint abstractly, which is not so limited to compositional rules as in Kandinsky's work. Pollock is probably one of the best known examples of this kind of art, and it has become an important part of painting today, which often falls under the umbrella term of materiality. This kind of painting rejects the illusionistic qualities of art, and instead embraces the natural qualities of the materials in use. It calls attention to their existence, as well as the act of using these materials to make the non-physical physical. So now that we have a grasp of the history of abstraction, some ways it can be inspired, and some ways in which artists can work with that inspiration, we can come a little bit closer to understanding all of this mad abstract art. There may actually be some method to this madness after all, it seems. There are a few other interesting things about abstraction that contributed to its creation, which we do not typically think of today when someone brings up these mad abstract artists. Firstly, abstraction was intended to be a rational and logical kind of art, not some flaky subjective nonsense as it is often characterized today. It attempted to remove all artifice and subjectivity, paring back at the art to leave only what was essential to its needs, as Kandinsky and others had proposed. It did not seek on necessary complications or embellishments just for the sake of it, and by doing so, hoped to make itself more accessible to the average person. Following on from this, the new art was kind of secular. It didn't spend its time depicting God's glories or the power of church and state, as most art before had occupied itself with. The angels and cherubs of Renaissance art are long gone and replaced with a calculating mode of representation that in theory could be understood by everyone, not just the devotees of a particular ideology. Third, it was intended to be art for the people. It wouldn't require special knowledge of history or religion to understand what was going on in these paintings, and it wouldn't rely on insider information of the art world to understand it either. If the art was logically created to be accessible to all, then everyone could enjoy it and engage with it, regardless of nationality, education, or social standing. It was to be an art for a global society. You can imagine what a great job they did with all of this when you consider how this kind of art is seen today, as pompous, elitist, and totally disconnected from reality. The fact that so few people understand or care about it today is probably the greatest failing of this kind of art. The intentions are there though, and the ideas of a cold, hard, logical system of art would probably be very appealing to a lot of people today who hate exactly this kind of art, ironically enough.
This is YouTube.
What brought about this downfall of abstraction in the eyes of the public was not the works of Kandinsky and his cohorts, however. That would be the result of an even more complex affair that began in the aftermath of World War II. It would involve shadowy cabals, mass manipulation of the public, and artificial control of information. As with many other ideas with disastrous consequences, it would originate in America, and it would use abstraction as a way of waging an ideological war.
All right, so that's that. Anybody got any questions about any of that? Yes, no, maybe.
No, I liked it, but other than that, because I liked the way he explained it and how it came about and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like once you begin to get a little background on the history of it, then it doesn't necessarily make complete sense, because it's gone off in so many different directions. But the general intent at the time, as he explained, was they were looking for a way of expressing the particular time and the society that they lived in. And so abstraction seemed to be a direction that they could make a break with the traditional art world and begin to express things that felt more like the way that people were actually feeling and the things that they were experiencing during those early parts of the 20th century. So it's with all the turmoil in the world at the time, and if you begin to kind of connect world history and what was going on in the world, when abstract art was evolving and how tumultuous those times were, you had World War I, you had World War II, but in between that, you had a lot of other upheavals in society. You also had a mass migration of people from rural areas into the city because everything was, the cities were growing rapidly. More and more people were relying on, industrial type jobs, to make a living and feed their families. So there was a lot of tension, during that period of time, and the world was changing, very rapidly, probably more rapidly than it had ever changed before, and people were just not used to that pace. And so this type of art, was a way of expressing, what was going on in society at that time. And, it still is today. We have not slowed down any, if anything, everything is sped up, so again, it's in a lot of cases, I think a lot of artists use it because it's a very expressive way of, exploring the way you feel and, not necessarily being pinned to particular images, right? Let me see how we're doing time-wise. Okay, it's 23. All right, I've got another video that I'm going to show you, and then we're going to look at some of the art that was that's been produced, within the 20th century And all of this is really up until, you know, the end of the 20th century. And we'll probably go in and we'll probably start talking about how art, or abstract art in particular, has changed from the end of the 20th century in, you know, 1999, and then where it's gone and how it's evolved, you know, in this first couple of decades of the 21st century. Okay, so let's take a listen to this guy. Where is it? All right, let's see. Got to go back to the share screen. All right.
This is a program about abstract art. It's a subject that can be as heavy or as light as you like. For me, it's just natural because I'm always doing it, so I'm thinking about it all the time. I also think about basic questions that many people have. How do we respond to abstract art? Is it supposed to be hard or easy? Is it about something, or does it exist entirely on its own? You see abstract artists chucking paint around. Why be so vague? But then when they're precise, how does that help? These could seem unanswerable questions, but abstract art has been around for 100 years now and is an ongoing thing. By exploring the private world of living abstract artists and looking at some key figures from abstract art's history, I'm going to show you that in fact there are answers. Amid complicated and potentially confusing works, there are hidden rules you might not expect. Hey.
Hi, Matthew. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you. Okay.
Okay, I'm going to get you to take some of it off.
I work every day in a studio, paint abstract paintings based on patterns, together with my painting partner, Emma Biggs.
You know how sometimes you get scrapes into it?
Yeah.
Can you get some scrapes into it?
Yes. That kind of
Yeah,
stuff. Like that?
Yeah.
Okay. But Em is really the generator of the colours. She thinks them up, she physically mixes them, she mixes up the paint, and she places them. I'm the applier. It's a kind of double act, which most of the time, the main emphasis is on what comes out of Emma's head.
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah?
Yeah.
The history of abstract art is really a history of experiment. So a lot of things come up for experimentation. You know, you've got colour theory art. People do very honourable and serious type of art based on scientific ideas of what makes colours zing together. Then you've got abstract art, which is all about accident. But all of them are trying to find some kind of visual metaphor which will be rich enough for what one might call.
Hi, it's Sam Barker here from the Motley Fool.
Okay, Sam. All right. Froze.
Behind me is Landmark Mall, or what used
Full reality. Art is partly ideas and theories, but it's really only anything at all because of how it looks. Looking is something you have to get used to. Here are some abstract squares, the kind of thing people often glance at and then turn away from, baffled. The one on the left is by Mondrian, a famous figure. and one on the right is by Lyubov Popova, who's less well known. We'll be meeting both those artists later. Each painting has shapes that echo the basic shape of the thing they appear on, the square shape of the canvas. In hers, you're seeing squares stretched out, fragmented, morphed into triangles, tilted so they seem flying or full of movement. In his abstract squares, the colour is stark, based on contrast. With hers, the colour is continuous and sympathetic. The grey and the pink are a softer version of the harder black-red-white relationships. The grey and the pink take the eye back gradually, making space throughout seem three-dimensional. So opening up to abstract values is an adventure, and you start by being willing to look. The dynamism of the way in which shapes are placed prevents you from reading that white as if it were a hole that can be seen through. It reads clearly as over the other colours. It's not easy to pull off. It depends on the minor displacement of angles everywhere. Pink follows red, and grey has a blue-green character that also complements the red. It's the colour in Popova's painting that contributes more than anything else to the difference between her squares and Mondrian's squares. If abstracts have got something to do with reality, but the artists aren't going to picture reality, why not? And what reality are we talking about? Art had been expected to picture reality according to approaches and styles that were acceptable to most people. A lovely landscape by Rubens. But then, in the 19th century, new ideas about reality meant Cézanne could picture reality as patterned shapes. In the early 20th century, the Cubist painter Braque responded to Cézanne by picturing reality as flattened space. A few years later, abstract art responded to Cubism with shapes and spaces only. People's sense of what was real was up for grabs because everyday existence was full of rapid change caused by science. Artists saw spirituality as both a challenge to the power of science and a way of harnessing it. This counterintuitive idea came from the spiritual movement of Theosophy, which was founded in New York in 1875 by Helena Blavatsky. Blavatsky took aspects of Eastern religion and aspects of science, mostly evolution, and came up with a spiritual movement based on evolution of the soul. Abstract art started at the very peak of Theosophy's popularity. People thought spirituality was like X-ray.
You see, the world has changed. You don't need to sell at events and galleries anymore. You can go direct.
Or infrared radiation or electricity. It could be revealed. There were a lot of different artistic takes on the spiritual, but the strangest was the earliest. Hilma af Klint, who was born in 1862 and lived and worked in Sweden. These are paintings by her from 1907. For decades, nobody knew about them, but recently they've emerged and started to be exhibited all over the world. grown totally invisible, she's become the main excitement about historic abstract art. A woman doing abstraction, plus doing it so it's full of meaning. What kind of meaning? Abstract artists were into spirituality, but Af Klint thought of herself as being in touch with actual spirits. She conducted seances in this room and received messages from spirits who were called the High Masters. She produced 23,000 pages of notes, working out what the High Masters were telling her to paint. It was all theosophical meaning. Theosophy says colours and shapes can symbolize the soul's journey. The tip of a coloured pyramid is the soul arriving within the golden circle of pure spirit. And there's pure spirit, Theosophy claims, when dark is balanced with light, masculine with feminine. All Af Klint's paintings are profoundly theosophical. The not theosophical thing about them is the general look. And this doesn't come from spirits, because, to risk controversy for a moment, there is no such factual thing as a spirit. They are mental projections. To have the ability to create such a mental projection without suffering debilitating mental illness is a fantastic thing. But when it comes to creating a work of art, mental projection alone isn't sufficient, because art isn't made just from visions. It's made from visual traditions. The other abstract artists, rooted in the visual traditions of painting, explained themselves only partly by spirituality. With her, it's everything. It was beamed down to her by a high master on the astral plane who commissioned paintings from her. She knew what the reason was, so that those down on the earthly plane, if they've enlightened themselves enough, might benefit from them. And that could be you, so keep an open mind. It was only recently, decades after her death in 1944 at 82, that Af Klint became known. Now her work is categorized as the first abstract art, but there's very little evidence she thought of it as art at all. Rather than abstraction, a type of art that didn't exist in 1907, she thought it was direct meaning. To us, it looks like abstract art, but it's really diagrams explaining theosophical ideas. To see what else there is to abstraction, you have to look elsewhere. The Russian artist Vasily Kandinsky is the lord of abstraction. He said it was created from inner necessity, and it didn't need nature to picture. It contained all of nature anyway, just in abstract art's shapes and colours. He meant the artist's sensitivity, his feelings and memories, are full of nature's impressions. They can be got down onto the canvas in a completely abstracted way. This is a painting by Kandinsky from 1912. Its title, Painting with Black Arch, encourages you to think about only what you're seeing. That black arch is unmistakable. But Kandinsky knows that seeing art is a heightened seeing. It's made loaded by you being very visually alert and by your thoughts and expectations being primed by some kind of theory. The Book of the Lord is called On the Spiritual in Art. Kandinsky published it in 1911, and it was read throughout Europe. It was the first moment of abstract art becoming widely known. Like Hilma af Klint, Kandinsky was inspired by Theosophy's notion of a coming new age of the great spiritual.
Kandinsky's artistic approach was different to Hilma af Klint's, though. She thought paintings were diagrams to be interpreted by study. He thought the actual materials of painting, colour, shape, line, could be manipulated to affect the soul.
Abstract, I wish I could. Not bother.
His line moves across the paper. It's captured on film in the 1920s. He's in his 60s and has been painting abstractly since he was in his late 40s. Making a mark, he doesn't know in advance what's going to happen because he's not copying anything, but his instinct for making is guided by his experience of making, judging what works, what doesn't.
Okay. I think that's
This is a tomato. Think
Yeah.
it's good for you?
not really.
Think again.
All right.
Guided by his experience of making, judging what works, what doesn't. That's a visual thing, not a spiritual thing. You had to get the spiritual to connect to the visual. Madame Blavatsky was not Kandinsky's only spiritual mentor. This is a meditation center built by one of Blavatsky's followers, Rudolf Steiner. Kandinsky read Steiner's theories. He was drawn to Steiner's proposal that we all inhabit not one, but several bodies. And one of these, the astral body, is invisible. He began attending Steiner's lectures in 1908.
By coincidence, this was the same year that Hilma af Klint first met Steiner. Unknown to each other, these two pioneers of very different types of abstract art were each equally aware that Steiner's education program at university had the title How to Know Higher Worlds.
Must be Germany.
Art could be higher than nature, Kandinsky concluded. Theosophy was essential in the mix, but he needed other elements too. They were the primitive, the musical, and the way colour works. Surfaces of the place he painted in Bavaria, were covered in simple art done by unknown artists, anything outside the Western mainstream. He called it primitive. The primitive, he claimed, gets to the essence of the spiritual. His insight about music and art is that music affects us profoundly, but it doesn't represent anything. He said art could be like music. His paintings before abstraction were glowing landscapes. Composing them gave him a clue. Working with colour was like playing the piano. He said, colour is the keyboard. The eyes are the hammers, and the soul is the piano with its many strings. The artist is the hand that plays, touching one key and then another key in order to make the soul vibrate. He was struck by Impressionist paintings by Monet. He imagined not even to be pictures, he thought, but just colours, and by his own landscapes. One day he saw a painting that had really good colour. He didn't realise it was one of his own on its side. Trivial accidents like not recognising your own painting or not realising a picture is a picture were the jolts of absurdity that Kandinsky needed in order to get his abstract experiment going. So the theory in action, the black arch in Painting with Black Arch, is the means by which the red shape dominates the blue shape, bearing down on it. The black is the accent that animates everything. Let's take a major rhythmic organizational idea, like music. The painting goes diagonally there and is countered by a different diagonal movement there. One movement counters another. The arch's blackness is continued elsewhere in other black lines, variations on a theme, pronounced or merged in, depending on their surrounding colour, like musical chords depend for their mood on what chord comes next.
My dad used to come home drunk every day and hit me. My mom had passed away from giving birth to me, and my dad hated me for it.
Well, the visuals of Painting with Black Arch have a logic that can be explained in musical terms: repetition and surprise, movement, counter-movement. It's not just logic, it's sensual impact. And in my view, it's great. Where does the idea that abstract art is difficult come from? From the viewer or the artist? What would it mean if Fiona Ray said her abstracts were spiritual? If Kandinsky's rule was to transcend nature, her rule is the rule of the surprise move.
At the moment, I'm experimenting with making a painting just in black and white. I usually use colour, but
What's the reason to not use colour?
I don't know quite how to express that, but in a positive way. But I suddenly felt incredibly fed up with colour, and I wanted to start again by clearing everything out and go back to a very basic black and white beginning. I've seen a really nice sort of loopy gesture that I think I can put down here. It really, the process, I know that it's quite strange being filmed doing this, but the process really is like this. It's like, shall I? No, I won't. Yeah, no, I won't. Yes. Okay, we're back. No, actually. And then suddenly you just do something like that quite casually without even thinking about it. That's good. I also think it's important not to take the same size brush or the same bit of colour and repeat it all over a canvas, like a sort of pattern or something. So although a finished painting needs to have its own rhythm and its kind of structural integrity, I like the idea of somehow getting different bits of paint language to join up and do that, and not to do with little repetitions.
So you don't literally join it out by doing the same thing?
No, no.
You've got differences.
Yeah, because I think
different zones of energy.
Yeah. I want the viewer to not be entirely sure what the focus is or what the most important thing is, that the whole thing overall is the experience. And I suppose that in a way, maybe that's what makes me an abstract painter, in that I think that the marks all exist as themselves, in themselves and by themselves, as well as going together to make some kind of image that you might read in one way or another.
Yeah. So you're aware that there are component parts. There's also an energy running through them all that unifies them.
Yes, and I'm also trying to make a picture of something that doesn't exist, which is an impossibility, of course, but I'll just keep trying.
Maybe that's a good definition of abstraction.
I think so, yeah, yeah. It is. It's an impossible task, but it's a very interesting one.
When colours are related together by abstract art, it's not just colours artists like, or they hope the public will like. They're noticing something that colour does, how it can be wrong or right, in or out of key, how the colour of light in the real world filters out all differences and creates a single visual register within which all differences are unified. In 1914, Sonia Delaunay, one of the great founders of abstract art, created this colour painting. It's called Electric Prisms. Delaunay invented a whole new way of compressing arrangement in art down to colour and form. What are colour and form? Form in art means arrangement or structure, but it also means the individual elements that the structure is made up from. Think of music. A piece of music is an arrangement or a composition, but it is made up of smaller musical events that are all related together, so there is a single unity, which is what composition is. The composition is a form, and the individual musical events are forms too.
Hola, me llamo Dio.
Colour isn't something that exists and light reveals it to us. Colour is light. And Delaunay's abstract rule was to create light by scientific laws. In the 1910s, abstract artists were bored of the power of science. If it could cause people to get around the world at high speed and communicate with each other across vast distances, as well as explore the depths of the unconscious, as psychoanalysis was doing, the modern science of the mind. Maybe science could also radically transform art, so art could be a cosmic vision of everything. Throughout history, artists had played with our perception of colour intuitively, but in the 19th century, science began codifying new laws about how we perceive colour. Colours go from red to mauve to blue, through all the spectrum and round back again to red. For a long time, this had been visualised as a colour wheel. But in 1855, the colour chemist, Eugene Chevreul, said colours opposite each other on the wheel have the same intensity. Placing them side by side causes what he calls an optical vibration. Delaunay absorbed that scientific rule and took it over to serve her own rule of painterly evocation of the emotional lift of light.
Softened colour is subjected to a rigorous but wavering grid, that circular layout.
The grid is the form she's using. She's unafraid of breaking it. Colour overlaps the borders onto adjacent colours, following a colour need. Where there's a chance that the relationship between the colours threatens to be the visual equivalent of out of tune, she changes the colour logic, bringing light green over purple so primrose will sing out. Or intensifying yellow-red to darker red, so it will connect to a rhythmic pulse of dark and light accents everywhere. Delaunay was married to another colourist, Robert Delaunay. They were impressed that their friend Kandinsky liberated colour from having to picture anything.
But the Delaunays had a very different approach to Kandinsky. Think of them in Paris over there, and him working in Germany over there.
Colour in Kandinsky is emotion, emotion events. They're interwoven to create a dynamic drama. He doesn't use the full range of colours. With Delaunay, it's just a simple design, radiating bands. But she uses a vast range of colour. And it's a real inquiry into what colour can do.
Every single element of the painting is about fusing or clarifying of form through subtle adjustments of colour. So the overall form or composition celebrates light as a sheer, overwhelming, spirit-lifting force.
The Delaunay's got that radiating circles layout from the glow of colour.
A lot of us want to get rid of intra-abdominal fat, what we call the deep fat. The biggest issue, you could argue, is obesity.
From the glow of colour around the electric lights by night in Paris. The old gas lights had only just been replaced by electricity.
Sonia Delaunay recalled in her memoirs, "At night on our walks arm in arm, we entered the era of light. The halos made the colours and shadows swirl and vibrate like unidentified objects falling from the sky and beckoning our madness."
In 1912, when Kandinsky's On the Spiritual in Art was spreading its message, Robert Delaunay wrote a manifesto called simply Light. The manifesto had a climactic last sentence, like the words of a colour prophet. Let us attempt to see. The rule John Maclean obeys is the rule to keep looking for the infinitesimal adjustments that will give simple shapes a convincing subtlety, like light in the world.
Let's go on and get rid of that iridescence. Oh, look, I really like the way that red's differentiating itself from the rest.
So they're very simple shapes, but it's the treatment of them, as well as the placement of them, that's important.
Yes. I do quite a lot of landscapes. I don't feel I feel a complete continuity between figurative painting and abstract painting. I don't see any difference. And I realize perhaps I'm not really a purist.
Yes, you don't think that it's about the purity of the abstract forms. You think there's a continuity between abstraction and reality.
Absolutely.
Visual world.
Yes, yes, absolutely. It's interesting that already I'm feeling, well, maybe I was being too impetuous, but it's a very beautiful passage that now, with the nacreous stuff coming through that very thin glaze of red. So maybe there's scope in this for something, you know, of sheer beauty, like the wing of a moth, or something fleeting like that. In fact, that could be the redeeming bit of the whole painting, and maybe I've won it after all.
So the approach is partly to pick out the forms and partly to allow the forms to seem to emerge from the ground.
Yeah, a mixture of the atmospheric and I guess just not atmospheric.
Yeah.
Now, I'd be loath to touch that right away, and it may be finished now.
Yeah.
But I feel with my own work that the simpler I can make it, in a strange way, the more profound I feel it is.
For the Swiss artist Paul Klee, whose abstracts are often nothing but squares, nevertheless, the rule was always to observe nature. In order to make something abstract seem true to the world around us, Klee uses tonally graded colour.
Tone is different to colour. Colour is colour, but tone is the alteration of colour's vivid, bright, vibrating impact by making that colour lighter or darker.
Tone here is mostly dark, but with a number of high spots where colour seems to sing out like sunshine hitting a hill, light seen through the trees.
You seem to have lost the sound on this for some reason. Okay. Stop it. Maybe in the video. There we go.
You never really see the mosque in the dozens of watercolours that he produced following this visit. And of course, it isn't Islamic culture or Islamic decorative art that interests Klee in this moment. You see carefully controlled, different degrees of transparency and colour that tells you about constantly shifting light.
You get the feeling not that he saw something that was different to anything he'd ever seen, like a colour miracle, but more that he came to the realization that there was something in him that he could work with, that he hadn't attended to before, and that he could now define.
The power of his visual experiments from that trip is in one thing affecting another, as if everything is perception, Nothing is anything in itself. Everything is perception. The light on some glass or concrete, the organization of shapes in the city, the look of the earth, the shapes of clouds and their relationship to the horizon. We organize this sensual input just as we organize our minds about who we are and where we fit in the world and how society is made up. Klee tried to do something about society. He was part of the Bavarian uprising in 1919. Within months, this socialist revolution, inspired by events in Russia, was crushed, the leaders murdered, and Klee's dreams of a communist society sympathetic to his kind of art were ended. For the next 20 years, until his death in 1940, Klee divided his time painting and teaching, most influentially in the Bauhaus, the school of art and design set up in Germany in 1919.
First thing you have to do as a visual artist, he would tell his students there, is pay attention to the infinite subtlety of tonal shades in nature.
The Nazis had different ideas to Klee's about nature, and his art was publicly mocked, along with Kandinsky and Mondrian, in the notorious 1937 exhibition called Degenerate Art.
The two most common reasons people go to see plastic surgeons are undoubtedly wrinkles and laxity, otherwise known as sex.
They called Klee a Jew, even though he actually came from a Catholic family, and they said he distorted reality. We all hate the Nazis, of course, but did they have a point about distortion? After all, what's the difference between Klee controlling colour so there's a feeling of reality, and him just distorting reality? Well, I agree with Klee. I think there is no single correct interpretation of what's out there. We each organise what we perceive and create our own version of it. Klee is trying to pick that process apart. He's offering proposals about what perception is. In our studio, the rule is to think about what's really seen when anyone sees anything.
You can only see any kind of form because of the way light reveals it. And it's through light and dark that you sort of understand the shape of something. So that's a fundamental aspect of seeing that we're abstracting in our works.
I mean, if you were to look at, for example, here, this area, which is lighter on one side and brighter on the other, so that in the sense that you read as lighter, and those two areas you read as darker, and that is contrasted with lighter tone behind it and a darker tone behind that. So it sort of gives some kind of sense of the little image occupying space, a bit like as if it had some sculptural form, I suppose.
Like a haystack in a field.
Yeah,
pyramid.
exactly. Yeah.
So you've got light, dark, and then you've got light, light, dark, dark.
Yes, exactly. And when that's adjacent to something which does immediately the opposite, so where you have light here, you have dark there. Where you have dark there, you have light there. Where that happens consistently across the whole canvas, it gives you a kind of a pulsing feel.
Yeah, so there's a rigid adherence to a system of light and dark, like there is in life, of light and dark, wherever you look.
Table.
Yeah.
The relationship between colour in abstract art and what might loosely be called reality doesn't always stay the same. Depends how colour is used. The next artist is the toughest, as far as giving reality a break. It's Mondrian. It follows a rule of always using very few colours. Painting by Mondrian in his famous style, severely minimal lines and rectangles. It's from 1922. It's made up only of black lines and white, or a sort of bluish off-white, and a few strong primaries: blue, yellow, red. Even these few elements are reduced down even more in that the whole of the surface, or almost the entirety of the surface, is just that white or off-white. The stronger colours are confined to accents along the perimeters of the square: blue, yellow, red. The centre is opened out, so there's nothing there but a square. That square seems to tell you about nothing except the square of the outer edges of the painting. In fact, every shape tells you about every other shape, in that it is either a variation on it or a repetition of it. What else are you seeing in it? Nothing, except you could see more than what you're already seeing. You're seeing shapes talking to shapes. They're telling each other about themselves. They're defining themselves by their slight differences. He said the masculine is manifested vertically, the feminine horizontally. It's the mysticism of theosophy. Theosophy says in the future all social imbalance will be balanced out in a new societal shape. Mondrian says his art visualizes that new shape. Here's Mondrian in his theosophical pose, which mixed theosophy with the philosophy of Hegel. Hegel said the universe is governed by rules of tension and contradiction. Mondrian's painterly version of Hegel's philosophical rule that every element is determined by its contrary, Mondrian offers a line, but also a gap. There's a black bar that looks as though it will repeat to fill that space, but it doesn't. In the first case, you're forced to see that line, also the edge of the painting that the line stops short of. You're forced to consider that edge. In the other case, you're forced.
Okay.
Which works better for getting rid of?
All right. Well, we're gonna stop it there. Okay, because that's through the. I think that was the third of the 6 parts of this. Okay. And anyway, we're gonna go ahead and go to lunch, and we will be back here at 2 o'clock. Okay. Everybody
Right.
got that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Did anybody see anything there that got them, interested or excited about it?
All of it.
I really liked the woman with the color, basically the huge circles of.
Yeah.
Her idea was more on color than anything else. I really liked that one. That one really.
Yeah, Delani and her husband did those. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, and I'm going to be giving you an assignment here. Hopefully, if not by the end of the week. And this is something I want you to think about. Because you don't. Just because I give you something to work with, again, doesn't mean that you have to copy it exactly. You can play with it. You can design it. You can, again, simplify it, abstract it, take it down to, a very simple, element, or as many simple elements as you feel necessary, and create something from it, that's totally your own. So just because I give you something to do, I don't want you trying to do it, the way that you might think I would do it. I want you to find your own way, and you can borrow, from any of those influences, that you see out there in the world, whether it's some of the abstract art we've looked at today, or whether it's, other artists, and or, just things out of nature, using colors, shapes, things like that. But, we'll talk more about that, as the week goes on. When we come back, I'm going to be showing a fair amount of work that's related to painting today, okay? Because that's what this is really all about. A lot of you have sent in things that are not related to painting, and I will save those, particularly like, I think Wanda sent in a lot of like handbags, purses, totes, and things like that. And, and we'll talk about those on Monday, all right, under the inspiration thing, all right? So anyhow, we'll be back at 2. Have a good lunch. And
Thank you very much.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.